Today we're talking about stress, and I really want to take a moment to look at both sides of the coin of stress because I think stress gets a little bit of an unfair rap today in, popular culture and discussion, especially in the health and wellness space. It kind of gets blamed for a lot of things, which we will dive into because there's some real relevance there. Chronic unmanaged stress is absolutely a problem, but stress really does have this beautiful side as well, and I want to just take a moment to explore that a little bit today because I think when we understand that to every pro there is cons and to every cons there is pros, we can really use it a little bit better to not just kind of stress less, which is something very much outside of our control, but actually be able to use it better for better outcomes for our health and our wellness and all those sorts of things. So chronic unmanaged stress absolutely does have an impact on our health. When stress is chronically high, we'll often see elevations of blood sugar, and we've seen this a ton recently. We've been using a lot of continuous glucose monitors with some of our clients, and one of the big takeaways from that is that impact of stress on some people's blood sugar levels. Stress really impacts our ability to sleep. That's another thing that we commonly see, and it impacts ability to drop weight, and it can also really impact your blood pressure. In fact, this is one of the really interesting components of stress and stress management, I think, is that for some people, if you have high blood pressure and you've tried a lot of things and it's a little bit unresponsive to various things, stress management can be something that really does have a big impact really quite quickly. And we see this because, when people go into a doctor's office, right, there's that white coat syndrome where you get your blood test, you get your blood pressure done, and you have this high blood pressure, and it's because you're a bit nervous. That's truly a very short term, a little snippet of how stress or our nervous system's response to our everyday exposures impacts our blood pressure. So if blood pressure is something that's really relevant for you, comment Blueprint below because we can send out our full blood pressure Blueprint document, which goes into this in a whole lot more detail. It's going to talk through some of the things I'm going to share here today, but it's got some extra bits in there as well that will be really relevant if that's something that you struggle with. So let's look at the two sides of the coin when it comes to stress. What you might not have really thought of is the fact that stress is literally keeping you alive today. So without any nervous system tone or any stress response at all, your heart literally wouldn't pump. Your immune system wouldn't respond to its exposures, would very quickly get infections. Our blood pressure would be on the floor, and our brain would really struggle to focus. In fact, we wouldn't be able to focus at all, and we'd likely get run over on our way to work. So that wouldn't be great. And stress also really has this beautiful impact of, it kind of brings a little bit of colour, texture and variety to life. We see this in nature with, the changing colours of the trees in autumn as part of that exposure to cold. It is a bit of a stress response in the trees. Or another one that's perhaps you might know of is algae that turns red when it gets heated, and it produces this antioxidant called astaxanthin. And it's a stress response that the algae has to heat, and it produces this vibrant red colour. So just as it does in nature, it kind of does this for us as well, in that a little bit of discomfort and a little bit of a stress helps us to kind of appreciate when things are a little bit chilled or a little bit quieter. Just like when things are very noisy, we appreciate when it's quiet, or when things are very bright, we appreciate when it's darker. We have this kind of need for that kind of texture and variety, and stress can really do that for us as well. The other part of stress is that it actually, over time, a certain exposure to stress actually, in the research, it produces happier individuals for various reasons, and people that are constantly looking for ways to avoid stress often end up having worse instances of things like anxiety and depression and coping behaviours that are not positive for long-term health. Stress also makes us stronger. A really good example of this is with exercise. When you do a workout, it's stressful on the body at the time, but the net result of it is that you get stronger, and that's in a physical sense, but we very much get that in a mental resilient sense as well. It develops more resilient humans when we're exposed to some things that are perhaps a little bit uncomfortable for us. So there's this real beauty to stress, but it also has this flip side, right? It has these things where when it's unmanaged, it can detrimentally impact our health in many, many ways. And I think this is why it is so talked about in the health and wellness space now, because absolutely a lot of the conditions that we deal with today, like metabolic syndrome, high blood pressure, high blood sugar, and weight gain and all those things, have a tie-in to our nervous system and our stress response. So stress is really our nervous system's response to our everyday exposures, to our environment. And what is stressful for one is not stressful for another. So our stressors are all different. So, I might like public speaking. I know that makes me a little bit weird. And for someone else, they might literally rather put lemon juice in their eyes. So our stresses are very different, but where we're all the same is that our body's biological response to whatever stressor is stressful for us is the same. We all have this adrenaline rise and a norepinephrine rise, and then that's followed by a cortisol rise. We all have, which has a whole lot of flow-on effects after that. So we all have the same biological response to stress. It's just that what is a stressor for one is different for the other. And that's kind of where the whole concept here lies, is that we can train our body to distinguish a little bit better between what is truly a stressor for us and what is not a stressor for us. And some of that is inside of our control. So what I want to do is I want to look at 3 key ways that you can kind of take a little bit of control over that nervous system response that you're having to stress, which is, we have our sympathetic nervous system, we have our parasympathetic nervous system. Our sympathetic is the fight-flight response. Our parasympathetic, parachute, slow down, that's how I remember that, is our rest, digest response. And we need to kind of be having this fluctuating, seesawing between the two of them. So the parasympathetic nervous system is a key part of that is our vagus nerve. And this is where the first tip comes in. And it's about breathing. So your vagus nerve runs down through the back of your skull and then down through your neck and your throat and then down into your abdomen and all down and around your diaphragm muscles. And so when we breathe in a more intentional way, and in particular through your nose, you trigger the vagus nerve rather, which helps the parasympathetic nervous system to become activated. So if you think about it, when you're highly stressed, when you're rushing, if you're running from something, you would be breathing through your mouth to get as much oxygen in as possible, and it'd be very shallow up in the top of your chest, not getting down into your diaphragm muscles at all. So when we simply stop and breathe in slowly through our nose, and we trigger those nerves all the way down deep into your diaphragm, it's nice because you're getting some good air in there, right? But the bigger part to that is it's triggering that parasympathetic nervous system through the vagus nerve. And a lot of people, we hear, breathwork is good, but we underestimate the power that it really has. And you can actually feel it quite quickly if you just stop and do that right now. So breathing through your nose, you could add this in before you eat. I see a lot of people who struggle with digestive processes or gut issues, and they're kind of looking for all these things. Maybe it's food allergies, or maybe it's, leaky gut, or all these things. And actually it's really tied into the state in which they eat, and constantly eating and being stressed. And that has a big impact on gut health and how we digest. So slowing down and taking some breaths in through your nose, down into your belly, and then out through your mouth before you eat can be a really good way to just kind of trigger that nervous system response to calm down a little bit. Or the same before you go to bed, help you wind down into a better quality of sleep. Or before you go into a meeting that perhaps you're a little bit nervous about as well. There's some real power in that. The other one is really acknowledging the cost that stress has on us. Our brain gets very good at doing what it does all the time, and so we kind of normalize it. And I think when it comes to a stress response, it's no different. So when they look at the brains of people that have been exposed to chronic stresses, they see that there's a real big development in the area that drives the sympathetic nervous system stress response, and there's an underdevelopment in the parasympathetic areas, in the creative and kind of more rest digest responses of the brain. So the brain's adapted to the exposures it's had, and it's got really good at just running all the time, and so it would prefer to do that than slowing down. And often we see this with perhaps really busy business owners or whatnot who they thrive on stress. They get stuff done, but it's really hard for them to kind of slow down and stop because they've got really good at just going and going and going. And it's good because it gets stuff done, but it has this negative effect because you can never recover, and eventually you hit an end point where you just actually can't kind of sustain it for any longer. So our brain gets very good and it normalizes what we do all the time. And I think it's about one of the ways that we can manage this is acknowledging that the cost is there regardless to how easy it feels for us. And I have a little analogy that kind of brings this one home is that, so I live 20 minutes out of town and I drive in every day to take the kids to school and come to work. Now 20 minutes, I know that's not far for people in big cities and whatnot, but in Blenheim that's a long way. But to me it's normal. I don't think about the fuel cost, I don't think about the wear and tear on my tyres, and I don't think about the time spent because I do it every single day. But for someone who lives closer to their work and school and all that, that would be a significant cost. But even though I've normalised it, it doesn't reduce the fact that it's still actually an outlay that I have to kind of meet. And stress is very much the same. Just because it's your normal doesn't mean that it's not costing you. So one of the tools that I think is really important to understand for managing stress and using it better is knowing that whatever your spend is, you need to have as much coming in the other door. It's no different than really good budgeting, right? If you've got a high level of spend because you work in a fast-paced, busy environment and you really thrive on that, we just need to make sure we're factoring in some recovery time that balances the load overall so that we don't end up in a deficit where we just have lost our resilience and whatnot. So bringing in some of those things like, some either a walk in your day in the short term, or some breathwork practice, or some holidays, or some weekends, or these things where you've got active recovery to rebuild that resilience and that whatnot in your body. The last one here that I want to touch on is choosing your hard. You've probably heard this phrase quite a bit recently. Again, kind of in the social media space, it's out there, but it's a really cool concept that does actually get to kind of the heart of our nervous system somewhat, and that is, it's really, really stressful to be in a situation that's not positive for you, that you don't have control over. There's kind of nothing more stressful than that. So being able to choose to do something hard allows us to build our resilience and tolerance to some of the stresses that we don't necessarily choose. So what often happens is that, like I said before, the brain gets good at doing what it does all the time. We can get stuck in a stress response and not be able to come back into that rest digest response. Whereas when we do something hard or uncomfortable, maybe cold plunge, which is something we've been doing with our clients recently, or exercise, for example, or even sauna comes into this category, though that's a little more pleasant to do, or fasting even. These sorts of things that are a little bit uncomfortable for us as an individual, but something that we're choosing and can stop, it gives our body the ability to go into the stress response and come back out, and go into and come back out, and really train that kind of flexibility of our nervous response. So there's a whole lot of power in being able to do some things that are a little bit uncomfortable in order to build our tolerance and resilience to stress on the whole, and actually improve our health outcomes with that as well, our recoverability and all those sorts of things. So the main thing I want you to really take away from this is that, when we kind of say stress is bad, so we need to stress less, we are making ourselves a victim of something and really disempowering ourselves, because stress is actually a part of life, and it's a good part of life. It keeps us alive, it keeps us interesting, it keeps us focused and able to do cool things. It's when it gets out of control. So the problem with stress is not stress itself, but it's when stress manages us rather than us managing it. And so what I would love for you to take away from this is that you actually have a whole lot more control here than what you think. While we can't necessarily choose all of the stresses to which we are exposed, what we do have a choice over is how we are going to respond to those. And that is where we can use things like breath work, or active recovery time, or choosing to do hard stuff and build our resilience to really use this beautiful thing that we've been given, this stress response that keeps us alive, but use it to our advantage rather than being a victim of it and all the flow-on effects that we get from that. So hopefully this was useful, hopefully interesting, giving you just a little bit of perspective shift on stress, shining a light on not just the ugly side of stress, but the beautiful side of it as well, and empowering you to be able to make some choices about how you use that for yourself. So as I said earlier on, if blood pressure is an issue for you, comment Blueprint below. These two topics are intricately linked, and there'll be a whole lot of useful information that you can take that further with if you would like to. And I will let you get on with your day. Have a good one. Bye.